Hello and a very warm welcome to all the listeners and all the viewers to this channel. And this channel is going to be about various topics like book reviews. Book reviews can include books which are purely fictional, which are non-fictional, and maybe some textbooks. There is no particular book which we will be considering in these recordings and on this channel. It can be a book on sports, it can be a book on music or a book on religion. There will be various very diversified topics on which we will be recording. Our today's topic is on a very interesting book which Francis Fukuyama wrote in 1992, and since it is the 30th year since the publication of that book, and 30 years seems a long time, but in the context of history and in the context of the time span on which Mr. Fukuyama has written, 30 years is not a very long time. And we are talking about his famous book, End of History, The Last Man. This book, which he wrote in response to one of his own articles in 1989, actually was published in 1992. And the main thesis or the main argument of this book is that liberal democracy is the best possible form of governance which cannot be improved upon any further. I mean, if we read the entire book, that is the essence and that is the message which comes out. Why Mr. Fukuyama is saying it is, in his opinion, it's because of two reasons or two principles. One is the principle of liberty, and other is the notion of equality and liberal economics in terms of free market. So, people who are interested in Western history or generally would be knowing that the Western civilization during their dark ages and during the medieval ages and at the end of the medieval ages became very much concerned with the idea of liberty because church suppressed them for about 1,000 years. And when they made contact with Arabs, when they made contact with Muslims, when they actually got the spirit of knowledge from them, the period which they call as their enlightenment, they somehow realized that it is the religion which has stopped us from growing. It was their notion of their own religion. Then they embraced the idea of liberty. I mean, it's not really the time to go into the details of Western history, but liberty is a very important notion to West because the last about 3-4 centuries, to them liberty means following hardly any dogma, or according to postmodernists, maybe following any meta-narrative or denying all truths and underpinning or locating human happiness as equivalent to the idea of hedonism or pleasure, and the notion of liberal economics, therefore, the free market or capitalism and democracy are quite intertwined with each other. Today we are going to actually review this book, so I am not going to give it any positive comment because to me the idea is basically flawed. The idea which is presented by Fukuyama in this book has been heavily critiqued already, but one of the idea of this particular recording is that we summarize that critique, number one, and number two, we see this book in the context of today. Now, initially people argued that how can history end, but that was a straightforward answer by Fukuyama, that he is not referring to history as a chain of events, but in the sense in which Hegel and Marx believed that history is actually the evolution of human societies, and which was not open-ended but would end when mankind achieves a society that satisfies its deepest and most fundamental longings or most fundamental desires. In case of Hegel, this was liberal state. In case of Karl Marx, this was a communist society. So the history not taken as the annals, not taken as the special events, that critique is nullified. I mean, it is very clear that Mr. Fukuyama is not referring to history in that sense. Next question which comes in mind is that if liberal democracy is the best form of government, and largely West, especially the Anglo-Saxon West, has embraced this form of democracy, has that part of the West or Western civilization in general, has it been able to settle all the big questions? If it is end of history, in the sense in which Mr. Fukuyama is referring, that this is the best governance possible achieved, so at least in terms of health and in terms of security, then why immediately after the publication of this book there was an invasion on Iraq? Why there was a massacre in Balkan states in the 90s? Why the rather dubious event of 9/11 occurred? Whatever the reasons were, but it did create a divided world and it fueled a lot of wars, the Afghan invasion and the invasion of Syria. Mr. Fukuyama, 4 years after the publication of his book, Huntington sort of nullifies and criticizes Fukuyama's thesis, and he comes up with the idea of clash of civilization, in which he presents that the civilizations of today will actually be going back to the ancient ways of thinking and will clash on the basis of beliefs and values. And he largely blamed that Islam, the religion of Islam, will emerge as a very, very extremist and fundamentalist force. And that was a very popular idea in those days. The West has always been fond of pushing popular ideas, and that goes back to the times of Renaissance or maybe Enlightenment. But in modernism, we see that when Charles Darwin published his book Species, it was a very charming idea at that time to discredit the creation to one creator, or to discredit religion and to give the entire credit to some sort of science, which was later termed as science of fittest of survival. And similarly, the fudgings and the changes in the diaries of Sigmund Freud were ignored in favor of his psychodynamic theory, because that idea clicked at that time and it seemed very popular and it went very well with the general idea towards which the society was moving, and which culminated in the formation of Vienna Circle and the total discredit to the metaphysical side of the world, and all those statements which are not empirical were thought as untrue. So this 90s period was also a period which was the end of Cold War era. Cold War has just ended in 1989, and Fukuyama was trying to establish the fact that since this war has ended, so there is no tussle between communism and liberal democracy anymore. So the only force which was opposite to Western thought or Western civilization was considered as Islam, and that was probably pointed out in Fukuyama's book as well. Now, the question remains the same, that what big issues or what big questions, including inequalities, including poverty, have been settled by liberal democracy. The greatest good news which the writer Fukuyama delivers is that the use of natural science as a regulator to propel universal history forward has achieved a great success, and that the conquest of nature will somehow create happiness for the populace. Now, how will it happen, and how will the general populace become happy with the conquest of science is not made clear. It has not, and what about all the mankind troubles which are attributed to the conquest of nature notion? We all know that conquest of nature has created a lot of environmental problems, and a lot of problems related with pollution, and a lot of problems related with diseases and the depletion of ozone. They are all attributed to industrialization and the world which was during modernism. So the idea of scienticism, which basically Fukuyama is pursuing, is heavily critiqued by Western scholars themselves, and especially in the fields of management and the field of social sciences. So William White has given an excellent critique in his book Organization Man on the idea of scientism and how the natural science model cannot be applied to social sciences. So in this summary, we are just trying to present that as the main critique. The agenda, to me, is to spread the material success through technological advancement and to make the world increasingly less and less plural and more globalized. Now that is important because universalism somehow is a Western dream. Be it management education, or be it the way of living, or be it the value system. The imperialistic thought process has actually never left the Western mind. And the idea of imposing their own governance or their own value system on others at the cost of local and indigenous culture and the cost of indigenous education system, which was considered somehow inferior to the Western system, has always been present in history. When we look at the history of imperialism and we look at the history of colonialism. So, if you look at education, governance, family system, most of the societies which are moving towards capitalism, or now largely societies are capitalistic, so this idea of universalism is somehow achieved through the economic liberty, through capitalism. But the value system of West is largely being achieved by the, through technology and through the technological aspect of globalization and the spread of social media, which has made the entire value system of West nearly ubiquitous. So this is one area where the material success of West through technology has actually pervaded the entire world. Another argument which the writer presents is that the world's most developed countries are also the most successful democracies. That is an area where I want to give some thoughts, because probably that has not been addressed largely in literature against the idea of Fukuyama. If world's largest democracies are very successful countries, then China is not a very democratically evolved country. So is the case with Russia, and their economies are in front of everyone. Their Human Development Index is in front of everyone. And on the other hand, India is considered as probably the biggest democracy in the world. But what about their economic success? If it is to be compared with Western countries or even China, Russia, Middle Eastern countries, where does India stand? If democracy was the cause of success, then where is that success in case of India? And especially now, with the advent of Hindu fundamentalism and Hindu extremism in India, why Indian liberal democracy has not been able to suppress it? Why democracy has actually paved the way for that extremism by bringing into power somebody who, like Hitler, was also brought into power through vote. And Narendra Modi and his RSS-backed BJP is also in government because of the popular vote. And what is happening in India right now in terms of the rights of minorities, in terms of religious extremist elements spreading throughout the society, is not something which is hidden. The world of social media is full of clips and full of information regarding this. So that argument is somehow debunked and is proved as a myth. The writer, however, concedes that man is not purely an economic animal, and hence part 3 of this book, which is based on Hegel's non-materialistic account of history or struggle for recognition, focuses on the idea of recognition. Fukuyama agrees with Hegel's analysis of history that the struggle for recognition gave birth to bloody battles and produced master-slave relations, and that French and American revolutions turned slaves into their own masters. Now, how is that when economically 99% of people are still actually slaves of bigger corporations? There is a strong movement against the 1%, and those 1% are located in liberal democracies. So how come this idea of recognition is solved by liberal democracy is not clarified by Mr. Fukuyama? But he refers to Plato's Republic, in which he argues that human soul has 3 parts. One is the desiring part and the other one is the reasoning part. Now these 2 parts can probably explain industrialization and economic success. But as far as self-esteem is concerned, or the pure recognition is concerned, it is not possible without the 3rd part, which Plato termed as thymos, or as spiritedness, or as the higher intellect. which is beyond logic. Now, here Fukuyama sort of flips sides and sees the virtue of recognition, but in the work of labor class, which are modern slaves, and I would include all the managerial class and labor class as well, and credited liberal economies and liberal economics with inculcating thymos in workers. So that is a very strange argument, and it's very difficult to defend. That if liberal economics is based on the principles of free market and is purely based on rationality and existence and survival and economic sustenance, then it is beyond anybody's imagination how would thymos or spiritedness be inculcated through this very logical and purely rationalistic economical idea. Mr. Fukuyama justifies war if it is driven by the desire for recognition. Now, this is a very lame argument because it seems as if he is defending Western imposition of wars on other countries, because what is recognition at a country level is probably the liberal democracies and the capitalistic societies. If they think they have recognized themselves, if they think they are somehow intellectually and morally and ethically superior to other societies, does this assumption give them a right to invade others? And is that all right for imposing wars on others? That is a question which Fukuyama has to answer. Then he gives a bit of very strange statement when he says that there is an empirical evidence from the last 200 years that liberal democracies do not behave imperialistically towards each other, even if they are preferably or perfectly capable of going to war with non-democratic states, not sharing their fundamental values. Now, event which happened immediately after publication of this book totally belie this claim. Even the arguments given by author in favor of universalism, they reject this idea. And we all know, and I've already mentioned, that the liberal democracies in the Western countries imposed wars on a large part of the world, sometimes on the name of trying to find the weapons of mass destruction which were never found in Iraq, sometimes in the name of trying to locate the terrorist which caused a 9/11 incident in Afghanistan, and that continued for 20 years, and it ended up in destroying Afghanistan and killing thousands of people, and then ultimately withdrawal of the US forces. So that is not something which goes very well with what Fukuyama is saying. And finally, who is this last man which the title refers to? Last man, according to Fukuyama, is a citizen of the modern liberal democracy who is concerned with his own comfortable self, his own comfortable self-preservation. And he is the man without thymos actually. He is the man which Nietzsche called as man without chest. He talks a lot, he is very rational, he is very logical, he is very utilitarian, he is very concerned about his own success, but he does not have any wisdom. And a lot of management studies and studies in social sciences have shown since the last about 200 years, the management and the people who run companies, the managers, they are very short-sighted people. They only go for this year's or next year's profits. And in doing so, they have neglected the longer-term impacts on environment which they are making, the longer-term impact on the ethics and morality which they are making, and any authentic management literature or social science literature is full of this debate. So that last man is probably not as full of wisdom or full of spiritedness as Fukuyama assumes. And this is briefly what the end of history thesis of Fukuyama is, and his last man idea is all about. And the critique on this book, I think, will go on and on as the time unfolds further, and it will be proven, and it is proven, that liberal democracy is not the best form of governance. A few of the very successful economies in the world, given the example of China, for example, or now Russia, and a lot of other countries, did not have much of democratic experience, and still they achieved a lot of economic success. And there are many countries, including Pakistan, for example, where parliamentary system of governance, which is one form of liberal democracy, has actually resulted in disastrous results. And many countries, about 50 plus countries in the world, have rejected constitution based on parliamentary system and politics which is purely based on the parliamentary system, and they are moving away from it. Even in Europe, there is a strong desire to move away from it. And it seems that, Fukuyama, when he answers the critique on his book, he says that I am not promoting American political philosophy, but on the other hand, I am promoting actually the sort of arrangement which European Union has done, and where they have transcended the national barriers and have come up with a political philosophy or an economic philosophy which goes beyond national interest and calls for a collective accumulation of interest and accumulation of even, unification of currencies. That is perhaps true in the sense that, America has not done it because America is a large country and it doesn't need to. But America did try to create NAFTA and tried similar arrangement with those countries, but it didn't work that way. But at the end, the claim that liberal democracy is the ultimate form of governance and it is something parallel with the end of human history in the sense that there is nothing better than this, that claim seems to be proved wrong in many ways, economically as well as environmentally, as well as politically. The argument seems flawed. So thank you very much for your patience and for listening to this recording. We will be meeting again on some other topic someday. Thanks a lot.